Great. Thank you. And Dominique, thanks for your kind words in the chat already. I haven't even said one word, and I'm grateful for your support here. So hopefully this will live up to your enthusiasm, Dominique. So as Dominique has already shown, you can leave comments in the chat. You're happy to, if you want to raise questions or comments during it, I'm happy to address it during our time together here today. But let me just start out by saying the following. Today, we write messages by tapping on glass screens. Sometimes we even talk to glass screens. But for thousands of years, quill pens were the norm. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, all of these were written with quills that were torn from live geese's bodies. In fact, Thomas Jefferson was such a prolific writer that he even bred geese at Monticello for the primary purpose of having a steady stream of quills with which he could write. Until the 19th century, the literate world required vast numbers of geese, all of whom were subjected to live plucking so violent and so inhumane that today's anti-cruelty laws would simply prohibit it. But it was not humane sentiment. It wasn't sustainability concerns that spared geese from such an undesirable fate. Rather, the invention of the metal fountain pen was indeed both good for the goose and good for the gander. With the newfound ability to write sentences uninterrupted by the need to dip a quill into an inkwell, no need to sharpen the quill tip repeatedly, metal fountain pens didn't just mimic quills. They were so superior that they quickly rendered the quill pen a relic of an archaic past. Today, we face yet another opportunity to use new technology to render a distasteful practice obsolete. But this time, the stakes are far, far higher. You see, today we face yet another problem with how we raise geese, but really the problem is not just geese. The problem today is much, much bigger. The problem today is that we are raising billions of geese, chickens, turkeys, pigs, cows, fishes, and other animals who we frankly really like to eat. And this is a major problem, of course, for those animals, but also for us and for the rest of the planet. You see, the planet is just not getting any bigger. Humanity's footprint on the planet is getting a lot bigger, but the planet itself is not getting any bigger. And one of the primary ways that we leave that footprint is through our food print, principally in the amount of meat that we eat. It is no longer a secret that raising and slaughtering billions of animals for food uses vast amounts of land, water, energy, greenhouse gases, and more, especially when compared to just eating plants. Raising animals for food is the #1 contributor to deforestation, wildlife extinction, and more. As just one example to put this into perspective, the animal agriculture industry creates more greenhouse gas emissions than the entirety of the transportation sector all combined. Let that sink in for a minute. Raising animals for food contributes more to climate change than all cars, all boats, all planes, all trains, and all trucks, again, all combined. Now, despite the fact that we all know it would be better for the planet and for our health to eat fewer animals and enjoy a more plant-based diet, meat demand continues to go up, not down. It's not only that we're adding more humans to the planet who are creating that increased demand, although that is part of the issue. It is also that on a per person basis, we are eating more meat than ever before in human history. Now, it would be fantastic if we all wanted to enjoy more lentil soup, rice and bean burritos, hummus wraps. Those are great foods, don't get me wrong. Many of us purport to love them. I do love them. I eat them all the time. But it would also be nice if we wanted to walk and bike more. Yet people seem to really like driving, which is why we need to make cars that don't rely on fossil fuels. Similarly, people seem to really want to eat meat, which is why we need to recreate the meat without animals. And just in the same way that metal fountain pens allowed us to write, but in a far more efficient way than how we had written for millennia prior, the task before humanity today must be to find ways to continue to enjoy the experience of meat, but in a far more efficient way, meaning without having to raise and kill so many animals. Well, good news. Just as there are many ways to create energy without fossil fuels, like wind, solar, geothermal, nuclear, and more, there are many ways to create meat experiences without animals. Already, companies are turning plants like soybeans and peas and wheat into foods that resemble animal meat, but with a dramatically lower footprint on the planet. These plant-based meats aren't fake meat any more than a metal fountain pen is a fake quill. They are just different kinds of more efficient, more sustainable meat experiences. And as cool as plant-based meats are, and they are really cool, there are certain limitations on using plants to mimic animal meat. Plants are just really far away from animals on the tree of life. So you need to do a lot to them to make them look and taste like animals. As a result, some companies aren't using plants at all. They're using animal cells. But let's just think about what it takes, why you would do that, right? If you think about plant-based meat, something, let's say, like an Impossible or a Beyond Burger, the way they make those products is basically, let's say the Beyond Burger as an example, you grow a field of peas, you harvest a field of peas, you mill it into a flour, and that pea flour is pretty low in protein, maybe 20% on a dry weight basis. And at that point, you've got this protein poor powder. And so you have to strip out the fiber, you strip out the fat, and you concentrate it down into a pea protein powder that is something like what an athlete might take as a supplement. After that, you now have a protein-rich powder, but it's not texturized like animal-based meat. As a result, you have to subject it to something that's known as twin screw extrusion, which is basically a fancy way of saying a lot of pressure and a lot of heat. That changes the molecular structure of the protein, so it goes from being round and globular like a plant protein to stringy like an animal protein. Then you get your hero ingredient of texturized pea protein, which then gets added to maybe 15 or so other ingredients, and you get something like a Beyond Burger. Now, don't get me wrong, Beyond Burgers are good. If you go to, let's say, a fast food restaurant and your choice is to get a conventional slaughter-based burger or a Beyond Burger, it's better for the planet and better for you to get the Beyond Burger. But there were a lot of processes that had to go into creating that Beyond Burger. You're not eating really peas, you're eating a small fraction of the pea that's been processed in such a way to make it taste more like animal meat with a bunch of other ingredients. Now, again, these products are better than conventional slaughter-based meat. They have no cholesterol, less saturated fat, more fiber. Like there's no doubt that while these are not as healthy, let's say, as eating a kale salad or a quinoa salad, there's no doubt that they are better than conventional slaughter-based meat. But you have to do a lot to plants to make them look and taste like animals. And so, as I alluded to earlier, you have some companies that are now, instead of using organisms from the plant kingdom, like peas, instead of just growing animal cells. This is called cultivated meat or sometimes clean meat. And this is real, actual animal meat. It's not a substitute or an alternative to meat. It's real, actual animal meat that's grown without having to raise and slaughter animals. And while I am enthusiastic about this technology, in fact, I wrote a book about this technology. It's called Clean Meat: How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner and the World. And there's a new paperback edition that actually just came out today with Simon & Schuster. You can go online and order it anywhere books are sold, from Amazon and anywhere else. But the book's website is cleanmeat.com. Again, check it out at cleanmeat.com. Now, as enthusiastic as I am, though, about the possibility for a future industry where we can grow meat without animals, the reality is that growing meat without animals is a very promising technology, but it is still many years away from becoming available at fast food stores and big box grocery chains, which is, of course, what's needed to start making a dent in the problem that we're trying to solve, since that's where most food is sold, at fast food restaurants and Walmart and Costco and Safeway and so on. And it's going to be many years before meat grown from animal cells is at a scale where it can compete in those locations. So while that may be something for the future, it's not something for today, in the sense that it's not able to scale in the very near term. However, there is a third way. Now, remember, we talked about the plant kingdom, like growing peas to turn them into meat. And we talked about the animal kingdom, like using animal cells. Well, there is a third way. There is another kingdom altogether that's not plant and that's not animal. And of course, I am talking about the F word. Fungi, of course. Now, not any kind of fungi, though. I'm talking here not about mushrooms, but I'm talking about microscopic fungi, often referred to as mycelium, or the root-like filaments of fungi that essentially blanket the earth. And so if you think about the kingdom of fungi, yes, we oftentimes think about mushrooms as being synonymous with fungi, but that is not really true. Only about 10% of fungi species even produce mushrooms at all. 90% of fungi species never produce any mushrooms. They're things like yeasts or filamentous fungi and others that are not mushrooms. And mushrooms are great. Don't get me wrong, I love mushrooms. I'd be thrilled to eat mushrooms every day. In fact, I try to. But mushrooms don't have much protein. Sure, some of them may have a kind of animal meat-like texture, but they don't have much protein. And most people who are eating meat, of course, they're doing it because they like the taste and texture and so on, but they also want that protein from the meat. Mushrooms might get you part of the way there with a somewhat meat-like texture, but they're not going to get you there on the protein. And while mushrooms won't do that, the good news is that mycelium can. Mycelium, again, the root-like structure of fungi, oftentimes not only has a very meat-like texture, but is packed with protein. So if you think about grade school biology, you remember there was the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and if you were taught properly, you learned that there's this entirely other kingdom of life, the fantastic world of fungi. Now, interestingly enough, if you have animals here and plants here, right, this on the tree of life, fungi are not in the middle. They are way closer to animals, evolutionarily speaking. So just as an example, animals breathe in oxygen and breathe out CO2. We know plants do the opposite, right? They breathe in CO2 and they breathe out oxygen. Well, fungi are so much similar to animals than to plants that, like us, they breathe in oxygen, and they breathe out CO2. Similarly, we all know that plants just put themselves out in the sun and they photosynthesize in order to gain energy, whereas, of course, animals don't do that. Animals have to go out, find food, and digest it. And guess what? Fungi are so much more similar to animals that is what they also do. They go out, they find food, and they digest it. Now, they do it in a different method than what animals do, but still, they're not photosynthesizing. They are finding nutrients in the environment that they then go and consume. So, interestingly enough, again, fungi and animals are way closer to one another, evolutionarily speaking, than either is to plants. So it shouldn't be surprising then that there are many species of fungi whose flesh, so to speak, is far more meat-like than plants typically are. And there are a whole host of fungi whose mycelium is not only very meat-like in its texture, but is also packed with protein, iron, zinc, and other nutrients that are typically associated not with plants, but with animal-based meat. In other words, we can use fungi to grow foods that in their natural whole food state are already meat textured and packed with protein without needing to slaughter animals or overly processed plants. And the result is frankly amazing. At my startup, the Better Meat Co., which is a company that was started 6 years ago, we grow mycelium, or what we call mycoprotein, into alternative steaks, bacon, sausage, chicken breasts, and these are dramatically more meat-like in the experience than those from plant-based sources. And again, they are all natural whole food nutrition. In fact, it is so good for you that the mycoprotein that we grow at the Better Meat Co. has, straight out of the fermenter, more protein than eggs, and it's a complete protein, meaning all the essential amino acids. It's got more iron than beef, more zinc than beef, more potassium than bananas, more fiber than oats, and it naturally contains vitamin B12, which is typically lacking in plant-based foods. In other words, you get all of the nutrition from meat that you want, protein, iron, zinc, and so on, but you don't get the things from meat that you don't want. Cholesterol, saturated fat, excess calories, environmental degradation, animal cruelty, and more. This is really like a superfood because straight out of the fermenter, you get that process that creates that really meat-like product cost effectively with a superior nutritional profile. It's almost too good to be true, but it is true, and we make it all the time right here in Sacramento, where I am sitting in our mycoprotein fermentation facility. It looks, when you walk into it, like a craft brewery, which is kind of what it is, but we are not brewing alcohols, we are brewing proteins. And we do it, again, in an all-natural way that takes very little time and is extremely efficient. Think about the fact that raising a cow for food, you have to feed that cow for well over a year before you get a steak. You have to feed a pig for about half of a year before you get a pork chop. You have to feed a chicken for about 40 days before you get nuggets. In our case, our little microscopic fungi are harvested after literally less than one single day. Less than one single day from the time we inoculate our fermenter to the time that we harvest our fermenter, we get delicious, succulent, nutritious mycoprotein that we then sell on a B2B basis or a business to business basis to other food companies so that they can make better meat. In other words, fungi fermentation can allow us to keep enjoying the experience of meat consumption, but by using vastly less land, less water, fewer greenhouse gas emissions, and more. And it is, of course, also far more humane to animals. By harnessing the power of microbial fungi fermentation like we do at the Better Meat Co., we can rapidly and cost-effectively mass produce such alt meat in stainless steel tanks that, again, really resemble more like a craft brewery. And we are able to do this in a way that is way more efficient than raising animals. In fact, I would go so far as to say this is among the most efficient ways to produce protein on a planet that is getting increasingly more and more crowded by the day. We currently have 8 billion of us walking around the planet today. 8 billion of us. And meat demand, again, is going up, not down. It's going up, yes, in most of the developed world, but it's also going up in the developing world. Places where it's going to matter the most in the future, like China, India, Brazil, Mexico, and so on, their meat demand is skyrocketing because hundreds of millions of people in those countries are thankfully escaping poverty. Now, of course, we want people to escape poverty, but when people escape poverty, one of the side effects is a much heavier footprint on the planet, including heavier meat consumption. And so when you consider the fact that we have 8 billion people today, hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of people who want to eat more meat than they currently do, and soon will be able to afford it. And then you consider the fact that according to demographers' projections, we're going to be adding another 2 billion people to the planet in the next 25 or so years. You're going to have 10 billion people on a planet that is not getting bigger. And as I said earlier, this is our only celestial body to farm. We're not going to be farming the moon. We're not going to be farming Mars. This is the only planet that we have in order to farm. And yet, we cannot just go deforest the rest of it simply to raise more and more animals. If we are going to satiate humanity's meat tooth, so to speak, if we're going to give humanity the food that it wants to enjoy, we're going to have to do it in a far more efficient way, which means producing the meat experience without animals. Think about it like this. Many technologies that we have today have displaced the use of animals in a way that is more efficient and that we prefer, but they still gave us a similar experience. Earlier, I was talking about quills and how metal fountain pens ended up allowing us to write more efficiently. Nobody stopped writing, right? We didn't stop using quills because people just stopped writing letters. We just found more efficient ways to write. First with metal fountain pens, and then ultimately all the way up to today by talking to glass screens. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to make sacrifices for meat, right? We don't have to give up the meat experience that humanity has evolved to crave. Rather, we can create that experience through microbial fungi fermentation that allows people to enjoy that same experience, but in a way that is far more efficient. Think about it kind of like photography. In the 1990s, we had companies like, let's say, Kodak and Canon that were vying for supremacy in the film market. And I remember in high school when we would go into a darkroom to develop our film. In fact, I remember when 1 Hour Photo came out in the late 90s, if my memory is correct, and I couldn't believe that I had lived long enough into this Jetsons-like future that we were getting our photos in only 1 hour. I was amazed. I could not believe it. And yet, of course, you fast forward to today and imagine that it took not an hour, but imagine it took 1 minute to get a photo. People would be outraged, absolutely livid, if you had to wait 1 minute to get a photo because we're accustomed to getting our photos instantly. Nobody stopped photos. Nobody stopped taking photos. Digital photos do the same thing for us. They allow us to capture our memories, right? Just like print photography did, but they do it in a far more efficient way that is better for us as consumers. And that's why you don't take your film into a darkroom anymore or to a store to develop it for you, but rather you take photos at will on your phone anytime that you want. Now, if you look at the companies that were involved in that, some of them prospered and some of them didn't. Kodak knew about digital photography. Yet it did not invest in the technology because it was afraid that it was going to cannibalize its core business of print photography and the chemicals that are used in darkrooms and so on. Whereas Canon thought this is going to cannibalize our core business, but we should do it because we believe it to be the future. And we all know what happened. Kodak went bankrupt and Canon became the largest manufacturer of digital cameras on the planet. The same thing happened in the video business, right? Blockbuster was dominant and they didn't want any competition for stores that were going to compete against them. And then Netflix began with a mail order DVD model. And that became much more convenient to mail order a DVD from Netflix than it did to buy from Blockbuster. And yet they both knew that streaming was going to come. They both knew that streaming was coming. And yet Blockbuster thought streaming could end up devastating its business model of having stores, these brick and mortar stores where people come to rent videos. Whereas Netflix thought this is going to cannibalize our mail order DVD model that our entire business is based on, yet they still did it. They still invested in streaming, and we all know what happened. Blockbuster went out of business, and Netflix is now the #1 streaming service. So, and the way we didn't stop watching videos. Again, we have the same experience of being able to watch a video like a movie or a TV show, but without the need to go to the store and hope they have the video that you want and so on. It's much more efficient. And the same is so with meat. Most people, when they eat meat, are not thinking to themselves, I'm so glad an animal was slaughtered for this. Rather, most people don't think about the fact that an animal was involved at all. They just want something that tastes good, is safe to eat, and maybe they're thinking a little bit about the nutrition that they're getting from it. It's kind of like when you walk into a room, you turn on the light. You probably don't give much thought to whether that light that you're getting in that room came from coal or wind or solar or geothermal or oil or something else, right? You just want the experience of an illuminated room. The same is so with meat. Most people just want something that tastes good, is safe to eat, and is nutritious. And so I believe that by harnessing the power of microbial fungi fermentation, that we can create that more efficient, more sustainable, more humane experience of meat consumption for people without having to use animals. And that this will be like digital film or like streaming video, that we will still continue the experience of enjoying meat consumption, but in a way that is dramatically more efficient.